Hello investors and welcome to my YouTube channel where I study the best investors and businesses from around the world. This week we'll learn from Charlie Munger's view on human misjudgment. This speech on psychology of human misjudgment was given to some audience at Harvard University in 1995, where Charlie speaks about the framework of decision-making and the factors contributing to misjudgments. It is concerned with the psychological basis of the economic behaviors of individuals and the impacts of economic processes on individual psychology. This video is dedicated to the study of psychology of human misjudgment as understood by Charlie Munger. So without further ado, let's get into the 24 causes of misjudgment according to Charlie Munger. Number 1. Bias from reinforcement and incentive. The power that incentives and disincentives have on the actions of others cannot be overstated. Munger says this should be obvious, but so many people don't understand how important incentives are for shaping people's motivation to complete a task. Incentives and disincentives are extremely important in changing behavior. He suggests that the first cause of misjudgment is to never think about something else when you should be thinking about the power of incentives, and that incentives will almost always trump any moral duty. And as a manager in a business, he says that the most important rule in management is to get the incentives right, especially since bad behavior is intensely habit-forming when it is rewarded. One of Munger's idols, Benjamin Franklin's quote, sums it up well, when he says, "If you would persuade, appeal to interest and not to reason." Number 2, man with a hammer syndrome. To the man with a hammer, every problem tends to look pretty much like a nail. The man with a hammer syndrome is the idea that if you only have one or two mental models in your head, you'll approach all your problems with the same solution. Hammer syndrome is a subconscious problem, and we do it every single day without any hesitation. This is why Charlie Munger encourages others to add more models in the toolkit, to expand the territory of knowledge, organize them, and use them for problem-solving processes. Here, number 3, simple psychological denial. This is the third cause of misjudgment, according to Charlie Munger. He says that humans perceive reality as too painful to bear, so they just distort it until it's bearable. Humans have a habit of distorting facts until they become bearable for our own views. Facing the truth can be too hard to bear. In the most extreme cases, such as death, love, and drug dependency, it is easy to distort facts when the pain of reality is too hard to face. So, simple psychological denial of reality, if the reality is too painful to bear, humans just distort it until it's bearable. We all do this to some extent, and it's a common psychological misjudgment that causes terrible problems. Number 4, incentive-caused bias. This is when we're too trusting of advisors who don't know more than you. The risk that the agent will shirk a responsibility, make a poor decision, or otherwise act in a way that is contrary to the principal's best interest can be defined as agency costs. Number 5, bias from consistency and commitment tendency or self-confirmation tendency. In other words, it's hard to change your mind once you're emotionally committed to an idea. This is a superpower in error-causing psychological tendency. These include the tendency to avoid or promptly resolve cognitive dissonance, which is the state of having inconsistent thoughts, beliefs, or attitudes. That's the power of commitment and consistency bias. We are creatures of habit, for better or for worse. It's the reason why you like a decision more the moment after you make it. It's why you have trouble updating your point of view when presented with new information. It's why a sales rep will do just about anything to get their foot in the door, because once you commit to something, you're likely to commit to much more. Number 6, bias from Pavlovian association, misconstruing past correlation as a reliable basis for decision-making. Pavlovian association is an enormously powerful psychological force in daily life of all of us, and also in economics. Charlie Munger says about 3/4 of advertising works on pure Pavlov. especially when you consider how pure association works. He gives an example of Coca-Cola and how they want to be associated with every wonderful image. Heroics in the Olympics, wonderful music, you name it. Our life and memory revolve around associations. The smell of good food makes our stomach growl. The songs that we hear remind us of the special times that we've had, and horror movies leave us with goosebumps. These natural, uncontrolled responses upon a specific signal are examples of classical conditioning or learning by association. But Pavlov made an accidental observation that dogs started salivating even before their food was presented to them. These emotional and physical triggers are also present in humans. Number 7, bias from reciprocation tendency. Reciprocity bias is our tendency to reciprocate the actions of others, creating a wave of indebtedness. If somebody does something for us or gives us something, we're more likely to return the favor or pass the favor on to others. We have a tendency to behave towards others as they have behaved towards us. Has a car salesman ever offered you a cup of coffee or a glass of water upon entering the dealership? Have you been handed a free sample of a product as a gift? These small acts are meant to initiate reciprocation tendency, your tendency to reciprocate the favors, disfavor, and concessions of others. This also applies to what's called the foot in the door technique, and can be used as a compliance tactic, which assumes that agreeing to a small request increases the likelihood of agreeing to a second, larger request. So initially, you make a small request, and once the person agrees to this, they find it more difficult to refuse a bigger one. This is where we ask for a lot and then back off to a lower offer. Number 8, bias from over-influence of social proof. Humans are programmed to conform. Social proof is embedded deep into our evolutionary code. We look to others to determine the correct way in which to behave. We compare constantly. We are influenced by the majority. In business, Charlie Munger gives the example of oil companies. He said, "The wave of oil companies buying fertilizer companies was driven in part by social proof. One oil company buys a fertilizer company, and all the other oil companies follow, with no one having any good reason for doing so." Even at the company level, we are willing to place an enormous amount of trust in the collective knowledge of the crowd. Social proof is most powerful for those who feel unfamiliar or unsure in a specific situation and who, consequently, must look outside themselves for evidence of how best to behave. Number 9, bias from contrast. This is when you are lowering or distorting your standards by comparing two options that are equally bad, or having a grass is greener on the other side mentality by comparing to an unrealistically high standard. Contrast basis is the tendency to mentally upgrade or downgrade an object when comparing it to a contrasting object. In a work environment, contrast basis occurs when a manager compares an employee's performance to other employees rather than to an established company standard. Number 10, bias from over-influence by authority. Authority bias is the tendency to blindly follow or believe the instructions and views of a person in authority. As human beings, we have evolved over the millions of years as a herd, led by a leader. The leader alone, or a set of trusted advisors, made the big decisions, and the rest of us followed suit. As a result, human beings have a deeply rooted sense of duty to follow authority. In the age-old days, kings, queens, and ministers played the roles of an authority. Today, politicians or CEOs play the same role. Even experts in a profession such as doctors, economists, celebrities, all fit into the role of authorities. Number 11, bias from Deprival superreaction syndrome. The sunk cost effect is manifested in a greater tendency to continue an endeavor once an investment in money, effort, or time has been made. This occurs when someone chooses to do or continue doing something just because they have invested unrecoverable resources in the past. Have you continued with a project long after you should have abandoned it? Preserved with a relationship even after the point of no return? Dragged yourself to an event in miserable weather just because you already bought the ticket with your hard-earned cash? These are all examples of sunk cost fallacy. Number 12, bias caused by envy, jealousy. Envy or jealousy comes from the desire to have a quality, possession, or attribute belonging to someone else. Envy or jealousy occurs often when the object of your desire is seen in possession of another person. Warren Buffett has been quoted as saying, "It is not greed that drives the world, but envy." Wanting something that someone else has or fearing that what you do have will be taken away is a primal cause of misjudgment. If you look at it from an evolutionary standpoint, humans need food to survive. Seeing someone else have food, if you don't have any yourself, it makes you want to take that food for yourself. Number 13, bias from chemical dependency. These are addictions. Humans have a tendency to be strongly influenced by drugs, which can lead to moral breakdown and massive denial. People are influenced by drugs, and the effect of drug abuse can be extreme. A person may sacrifice a lot as a result of his or her addiction. It can be from legal drugs like alcohol or illegal drugs like cocaine. Usually, these chemical addictions always cause a moral breakdown and almost always involve massive denial. This also has the undesired effect for someone to have the tendency to distort reality so it is bearable. Number 14, bias from misgambling compulsion. Compulsive gamblers suffer from an optimism bias that modifies their subjective representation of probability and affects their decisions in situations involving high-risk monetary wagers. A growing number of gamblers suffer from pathological gambling, a disease that is usually characterized as either a loss of impulse control or a behavioral addiction. It results in an inability to limit the frequency of gambling and the amount of money wagered. This increasingly common psychiatric disorder creates financial, professional, and personal hardships that can have severe consequences for the patients and the people around them. Number 15, bias from liking distortion. People ignore the faults of other people, products, or companies that they love, like, or admire. Humans ignore the faults of, comply with the wishes of, and favor people or products associated with the objects of their affection. Number 16, bias from disliking distortion. This is where we are under the influence by someone we dislike, especially if they are right and we're wrong. Humans ignore the virtues and views put forth by those things or persons they dislike. People often distort facts to justify the hatred towards people, products, or companies while putting on blinders to other options or opinions. We even dislike products or views associated with what we hate. Number 17, bias from the non-mathematical nature of the human brain. The human brain tends to ignore rational and the correct decision by favoring the emotional side. Bias arises from the non-mathematical nature of the human brain and its natural state as it deals with probabilities, employing crude heuristics, and is often misled by mere contrast. We are too stupid to understand maths and too lazy to learn. Number 18, bias from fear of scarcity. A scarcity mindset is the belief that there will never be enough, resulting in feelings of fear, stress, and anxiety. A lot of hate comes from scarcity and competition. Whenever we compete for resources, our own mistakes can mean good fortune for others. In these cases, we affirm our own standing and persevere our self-esteem by blaming others. At first, we are merely annoyed. But then, as the situation fails to improve and our frustration grows, we are slowly drawn into false attributions and hate. We keep blaming and associating the others who are doing better with the loss and scarcity we are experiencing, or perceive that we're experiencing. That is one way our emotional frustration boils into hate. Number 19, bias from sympathy. Munger cautions human sympathy. If they immediately say, "I will never do it again," then the regret or remorse is not genuine. Sympathy acts in a way that provides a means of understanding another person's experience or situation, good or bad, with a focus on their individual well-being. It is often easier to make decisions based on emotional information because all humans have a general understanding of emotions. This ability to see things from another person's perspective and sympathize with another's emotions plays an important role in our social lives. But it's important to remove bias from sympathy. This is why Munger says to not trust someone who immediately says, "I've never done it before and I'll never do it again." Number 20, bias from over-influence and vivid evidence. It is very easy to miss the vivid evidence. Munger cites the example of Belridge Oil, where they turned down a large block of shares because he just misweighed it, based on his assessment of the extraordinarily peculiar CEO. That decision cost him a short-term profit of more than $5 million, and that mushroomed into hundreds of millions of dollars on an opportunity cost basis over the ensuing decades. By reliving or remembering vivid experiences, it makes you believe that the same thing will happen in a given scenario. With countless possibilities, the expectation and belief that history repeats instead of rhyming over-influences the decision-making process. Number 21, bias caused by mental confusion caused by information not arrayed in the mind to create sound generalizations. This is where you've memorized new information, but you haven't learned it or know how to make it useful. You can test your new information by answering why. This is where we develop a response to the question why. Charlie Munger says that you've got to array facts, theory, structure, and information by answering the question of why. If you don't do that, then you just cannot understand the complicated world that we live in. Number 22, stress-induced mental changes. This is similar to the Pavlov conditioning, where stress causes us to change our behavior, whether it's small or large, or temporary or permanent. It's an easy way to make mistakes and cause unnecessary mistakes in judgment. Number 23, common mental illnesses and declines, temporary and permanent, and quitting the tendency to lose the ability through disuse. Although Charlie skipped this explanation since he said in his lecture that he doesn't have time for it, this cause of misjudgment talks about the common mental illness that can decline one's thought process either permanently or temporarily. It will be tough to have good judgment if you're clouded by temporary or permanent mental illness. Number 24, the do or say something syndrome. It's important to note that Munger considers the say-something syndrome a major source of development and organizational confusion. The say-something syndrome is essentially describing our innate bias towards action or expression, our confusion of activity with results. Most of us, whether consciously or unconsciously, believe that more action will equal better results. Although not a particular cause of misjudgment, Charlie Munger talks about the combination of effects which he dubs the Lollapalooza Effect, which I would describe as the 25th cause of misjudgment. Number 25, the Lollapalooza Effect, the combination of one or several causes of misjudgment. All the previous tendencies interact with each other and, when combined, have an exponential effect. All 24 tendencies interact with each other, and people will merge multiple tendencies in favor of a particular outcome. The Lollapalooza tendency can be used for positive or negative purposes. We humans have many inherent biases and tendencies that can sway our behavior one way or another. When several of them act in concert to drive us towards a particular action, you have the Lollapalooza effect. The Lollapalooza effect can create large-scale drivers of human behavior. This was a long video series, and congratulations on sticking through all the way to the end. Let me know in the comments below if you think Charlie Munger missed any causes of human misjudgment. Thank you so much for watching, and if you like this video, please share it with your friends and family. It'll help this channel a lot. Leave your comments in the section below, and let me know your thoughts about this video and what I should cover next.